After 6 months of living with my roommate, I had to call the cops. 5 years ago, at the ripe age of 18, I moved out of my parents' home to be closer to the community college I was going to attend at the time. It was an hour away, and it would be the first time that I'd get a taste of being an independent adult and living away from them. I was obviously nervous and stressed, but I was looking forward to the freedom of having my own place. I'd be able to stay out late on the weekends, buy whatever I want, play my music as loud as I'd want to, and basically do all the things I couldn't get away with doing. So yeah, I was ready to enter a new stage in my life. Sure, I'd miss them, but I'd obviously stay in touch, and it wasn't like I was moving to the other side of the world. So when I found an apartment that was just blocks from the college I was applying to, I began to count down the days until my eventual move-in date in the fall. It was the cheapest apartment complex I could find within a 50-mile radius, and it was conveniently located near a busy shopping district, so I could basically walk to do my grocery shopping. Overall, it was ideal, and I had read dozens of reviews that gave praise to the complex, so I really wasn't worried that I would regret moving in. I even did a tour of the place and was impressed with the very modern look and the fact it had a gym in a decently sized park behind the complex itself that was open only to the tenants, which meant no homeless people sleeping on the benches. Best of all, it was gated. You'd need a code to enter the premises. I also had a new job lined up that would pay me just above minimum wage. I'd have enough income to afford the rent. My move-in date was fast approaching, and finally one day in August I was set to move in. I packed away all my stuff in suitcases and boxes. My older brother Dale came by with his moving van, and we loaded everything inside. I said my goodbyes to my parents. I promised to call as soon as I arrived. I waved goodbye and climbed into the van, and we drove off. I could hardly wait to finish unpacking and spend my first official night at my new crib. Dale was telling me of all the potential house parties we would throw and sneaking me into nightclubs despite the fact I wasn't 21 yet. I really had no interest in parties and club hopping. None of that appealed to me, but Dale was the opposite. He was a wild frat bro who would constantly throw parties as an excuse to get drunk and hook up with cute girls. Dale had gotten a DUI once and had his license revoked after one particular night of heavy partying and drinking. But since that incident that happened last year, he's been trying to sober up, but he still drinks every weekend, so I guess he isn't ready to kick the habit yet. We finally arrived at the complex. Dale helped me bring everything inside. It took us practically all day to unpack. Afterwards I was exhausted and went to sleep after he left. Here I was now on my own, well, at least I thought I would be. I guess I forgot to mention that I'd be moving back into my parents' house about 6 months from that day, because my soon-to-be roommate would turn out to be a junkie alcoholic who ran into some serious trouble with his dealer and would be the reason I would have to move out and call the cops. But for the first month things were easy going. I was going to school and working and had a decent social life, but all of that would change in the following months, and I hate to say that my brother Dale is partly to blame. Now you're probably wondering why I ended up having a roommate. It wasn't so much that I wouldn't be able to cover the monthly rent. I was more than apt to. I just started to get lonely after a few weeks, and I was going mad having silence and not having anyone to help do the chores and cooking. I was accustomed to that with mom and dad, but all of that fell on me now. I guess I was also lazy. All in all, I did need the company. Dale knew a guy who needed a place and was struggling to find some place in his budget, so he told him he could crash at mine for as long as he needed to. What Dale failed to mention was this dude had been evicted from his previous apartment because on multiple occasions he failed to pay his rent, and his ex had kicked him out due to his drug problems and heavy drinking. His name was Alan, and he was a 27-year-old who was good friends with Dale. They had known each other since high school. I had never met him, but Dale said he was really cool and laid back and mostly kept to himself. So I assumed he was chill. Boy, was I wrong. I wish Dale had let me chosen my own roommate. He wasn't the best judge of character, but I went along with things. One day Alan showed up unexpectedly. It was late and I heard knocking, and I begrudgingly got out of bed to answer, and there he stood. He was tall, maybe 5'11", and had quite an impressive build. He wore a dirty white t-shirt under an even dirtier brown leather jacket. His jeans were ripped and looked discolored, and his tennis shoes were unlaced. It looked like he hadn't shaven in days. In fact, it looked like he didn't prioritize his hygiene much because he smelled awful. He grinned at me and shook my hand. I recoiled inside as we made contact and wanted to puke, but I held in my discomfort. I knew he was going to be a major red flag, but I let it slide. I didn't want to be judgmental, and Dale was just trying to help. Yo, chill place you got here, dude. Looks better than my one bedroom. Man, this place is definitely an upgrade, he said, looking around my apartment. He threw his backpack onto my couch and leapt over right smack on the couch like he owned the damn place. I was feeling irritated. This guy had the nerve to show up at 9 waking me up, and now here he was planting his ass on my clean couch covers. I was going to have to set some ground rules, because there was no way I was gonna have a filthy roommate who didn't bother bathing himself once in a while. Well, it's good to meet you, Alan, I said with a hint of sarcasm that I hoped he wouldn't pick up on. Dale told me you needed a place, so he offered mine. It's pretty nice. I don't have any complaints. I really needed to go back to sleep, and I wasn't interested in having a late night chat with this slob, so I was just going to retreat back to my room and let him sleep out here. There wasn't a spare bedroom. I hadn't thought to get a 2-bedroom, as they were way more expensive, and I wasn't sure if I could rely on Alan to help with the rent, but in hindsight I didn't know that he wasn't going to be any sort of help at all. Alan put up his feet on one of the pillows and stretched his arms behind his head. He was adjusting quite well to his new living arrangements. He seemed like the type to have a disregard for people's living spaces. That was something that just really got under my skin and made me curse under my breath. Appreciate it, man. Your bro is a real one. Oh, he's also gonna bring the rest of my stuff tomorrow. And look, I won't give you too much trouble. I lived alone once too. It has its pros and cons, but it's not so bad. He looked at me with a pathetic grin as though waiting for a response. I just gave a slight nod and told him I was going to sleep. I turned to walk back, hoping that I could get a good night's rest, but I got the impression that Alan was a night owl, which would be another red flag. A few hours into me being asleep, I heard faint knocking. I raised my head a little and perked myself up by the arm and got out of bed. I walked over to the door and opened it to see Alan holding a bottle of Hennessy. I could make out a look of unease in his eyes. He looked so nonchalant before, but now I could tell he was nervous, but I didn't want to rush to any conclusions. I barely knew the guy anyway, and Dale wasn't very transparent about his friendship with Alan. Listen, man, I gotta bounce. One of my buddies just hit me up. I gotta meet him in 10. I'll see you later, bro. Tell Dale he can leave my stuff here, he said with a hushed but rushed voice. And with that, Alan buzzed out of the apartment. I didn't care where he was going. He was a grown man after all, and I wasn't going to set a curfew on someone pushing 30. But I couldn't help but feel a bit suspicious. I pushed my thoughts to the back of my head and went to sleep. If Alan gave me any problems, I'd kick him to the curb, and I really did want to throw his stuff out and tell him to find another place, but I felt somewhat bad for the dude. I guess I was just gonna have to welcome my new roommate with open arms. The next day I woke up to start my day. I had a few classes today, but I wasn't in much of a hurry. It was already 9:30 a.m. I walked to the kitchen to make myself some breakfast. I didn't see Alan. Maybe he lost track of time or something last night. I went about my normal routine and tried not to think too much about Alan and his whereabouts. It wasn't my business. When I finished the last class of the day, I headed back to do some studying. I unlocked the apartment and poked my head inside, and to my shock I saw bottles all over the coffee table. Alan must have shown up and decided to leave a welcome gift. I called out his name, but there was no response. He didn't bother to clean up his crap. There was no way I was going to let him trash the place, so I went to grab a trash bag and tossed all the bottles inside. If he bothered to come around, I'd give him a piece of my mind. After doing some tidying up, I was getting hungry. I pulled the fridge open to look for any leftovers. As I was rummaging through the fridge, I saw an empty gallon of milk all the way in the back. Strange. I had just bought 2 full gallons of milk last week. I had an idea of who the culprit was. Alan had more than his share of my milk, and I did all the shopping. How does one dude go through a whole gallon of milk in one day? I had barely even drank a sip of it, and it was full before he got here. I closed the fridge instead and passed on eating. Alan really had some fucking nerve. It went on like this for a number of days. Alan would come in and out at all hours of the day unannounced. He'd constantly leave booze all over the place, even in my bedroom, and he'd eat most of my food. He also had a habit of leaving shaving cream on the mirror and used my deodorant, and I only knew because I saw it open on the sink and had to throw it away. When Alan wasn't gone, he'd either be on the couch sleeping making horrible snoring sounds, or he'd be downing an entire bottle of Hennessy and hogging the television. On many occasions I'd have to sit him down and talk to him about having proper roommate etiquette, and told him if he didn't clean up his act I'd send him on his merry way. But what really grinded my gears was that he never paid the rent. He made up excuses, like getting his paycheck late or his ex begging him for money. He always had a reason why he couldn't put down his share. I understood the first couple of times, but I became increasingly upset at his lack of fulfilling any real responsibility. It was stressing me out, and I was considering giving him the boot. To this day I'm kicking myself for having put up with him for so long. I was such a dumb kid back then. Sadly, things started to escalate. While I was in my room playing video games one day, Alan barged in. He slammed the door so loud the whole place shook, and it startled me. He stumbled inside, barely able to keep his balance. I helped to steady him, but he almost fell over me. I dragged him onto the couch. Alan had bruises and scratches on his face. His lips and nose were bleeding, and he had a black eye. He reeked of booze and weed. He tried saying something, but I could barely make out what he was trying to communicate as he was slurring his speech. His expression really freaked me out. His eyes were drooping and the saliva was dripping from his mouth. I needed to know what the hell was going on, but I didn't think I was going to get much out of him. "Whoa buddy, you look messed up. You get in a bar fight? I bet it was pretty rough. Shit. Maybe you should get cleaned up or something, man. You look like hell," I said, both in a joking and concerned manner. Alan only mumbled. He tried to stand up, but it was obvious he was in no condition to do so, so I forced him back and told him I'd get him some water. I poured some from the sink and went over to give him the cup, but Alan was already up from the couch and texting on his phone. He looked up at me and I saw that he was getting anxious. He was sweating and ran his fingers through his greasy brown hair like he was in some sort of trouble. "Hey man, you gotta loan me some money. I need it real bad. I owe a couple $100. I'm in a bind right now. You gotta understand, man. I could get messed up even worse." He was panicking. It almost looked like he was about to cry. I tried to calm him down, but Alan was becoming more and more agitated. I could sense that he was tensing up. I was even getting scared. He might have been a drunken zombie, but he could blow a fuse at any second, and I didn't want to be anywhere near him if it came to that. Alan started to curse loudly and he smashed a bottle on the wall. I yelled at him to knock it off, but at this point he was in a reptilian state and just kept on smashing more and more bottles. I didn't know what to do. I'd be out of my mind if I tried to fight him. He was larger than me. Sure, I worked out, but my strength paled in comparison to his own. He'd probably twist me into a pretzel. Instead, I just ran back into my room and locked myself inside, hoping he'd tire himself out. Eventually I heard a slamming of the door. Alan left. There was broken glass everywhere. I had to be careful not to step on any. He had gone completely insane, and who knows what he'd do to me if he ever went off like that again. I immediately picked up everything. It took hours, but I managed to make my apartment almost spotless except for the permanent stains of booze on the carpet. Soon after, I called Dale to explain what went down. He brushed me off and said Alan just needed to let some steam off and not to worry so much. He didn't understand the gravity of the situation with Alan, and we went back and forth with each other until I just hung up. I couldn't believe Dale could be friends with a jackass like that. I almost wondered if Alan got Dale to start drinking, because it only started to happen by his junior year of high school. Dale was a straight-A student, but once he started hanging out with Alan and his crew, his grades started slipping and he even got to his classes late. Alan was a bad influence from the beginning, and it's sad to see how he turned out. I didn't see Alan for the next few days. I was still shaken up about the incident. I thought of buying myself a handgun in case he posed himself as a threat. But more than anything, I wanted to get him help, as he was spiraling and he had a disease, and that disease was alcoholism. Dale came by the apartment, we sat down to talk, and during our conversation he brought up Alan. He's been buying drugs from his dealer. I really didn't want to tell you he was a junkie, man. I figured maybe if I didn't say anything you'd give him a chance. He's been through a lot and he's trying to get better. It took a while for me to say anything back. I was mad that Dale kept very important details about Alan from me, but arguing with him over it wasn't the solution. Dale may have not picked the best sort of friends, but he genuinely did care. It was just unfortunate I had to see Alan's addiction firsthand and how it was wrecking his life. Before he took off, he had scratches and bruises on his face like he had been in a fight. And the guy was pretty nervous, like, I don't know, he must be in some serious trouble, probably with his dealer. Dale only shrugged his shoulders. If anybody knew why Alan was behaving so jittery, it had to be Dale. He was close enough with him that he could give me a straight answer, but I don't know that Dale wanted to blab Alan's business to me just because we were related. I did have a right to know, though. If Alan came back, we'd both need to send him to a rehab facility. I don't know. I haven't really talked to him much. He's been blowing me off a lot lately. Says he had to meet someone. Wouldn't tell me who. I didn't even know how he was getting dope like that. I always thought he only drank. Man, that explains him being real weird around me for that past year. Dale and I talked for another few hours until he left and told me he'd tried getting a hold of Alan. I doubted we'd hear from him for days. I was beginning to think he went missing, but if he had left of his own volition, then we couldn't report him missing. There was a chance he might have taken his own life, and if so, no one would have been there to stop him. Alan's ex showed up to my apartment a few weeks later. It was a Friday morning and I had heard a loud banging and shouting on the other side of the door. She was looking for Alan, but she'd only find his roommate, who wouldn't be able to give her any explanation of his sudden disappearance. She busted inside once I opened the door. She called out his name several times. She was going on about his lazy ass owing her money. I told her he wasn't here and that she'd have to come back some other time. You tell that son of a bitch I want the rest by Monday. If I don't get it, I'll take all his shit and sell it, she said in a very matter-of-fact tone, and spun around and walked out, slamming the door hard behind her. Boy, I wondered just how much he owed her and how he'd be able to help me pay the rent and pay her back. Alan finally came back the following Tuesday. I found him slumped on the couch, but when he saw me he instantly perked up and then he shook me by the shoulders. I tried to push his hands off, but he had a strong grip. Alan looked absolutely mad. He was on the verge of having a total mental breakdown. He looked even worse than the last time I had seen him. Like he had gotten a beating with a bat or something. I finally managed to break free of his grip, and when I did he started sobbing. He's after me, he's gonna find me. If he finds me, I swear to God he'll kill me. I swear this time he'll do it, Alan said through sobs. Whoa, who's going after you? What the hell does he want? You've got to snap out of it, Alan. You need help, man. You're gonna get us both killed. Alan was rocking back and forth and fidgeting his fingers like crazy. I sat down next to him trying to console him. I was no therapist, but I had enough sympathy to at least show some support, even though I was afraid and didn't want to get involved in what could be a very deadly conflict. Is it your drug dealer, Alan? Do you owe him? Alan was a bit calmer now, but he still struggled to compose himself. Why yeah, it's him. I told him I didn't have enough. I told him I needed more time. Guess he got tired of waiting. He came around with some buddies of his. They beat the shit out of me. I couldn't fight him, man. It was 5 of them. I put my arm around his shoulder. I didn't know what to say in the moment. I just knew that I wanted to be here for him. Even if we weren't friends, I didn't have any genuine hate for Alan, despite him being a lousy roommate with drug and alcohol problems.